it was such a small idea in the beginning. I had been a hairstylist forever, and then I was a stay-at-home mom, and I really loved that. I just wanted something for myself, and I wanted to do something, and I just had this like itch to go find something. And then we came in and kind of blew the doors off of hair and blew them away. I like to really be as like raw and open as I can be. If I did it, you can do it. And like, to be able to inspire people that like you don't have to have followed one certain plan or way or whatever, and you can go do it your own way. I'm a big believer in like everything happens for a reason. And I'd always said early in the first like year, like I bet we're gonna sell this business for 250 million. Anybody can do anything. You know, I think we put a lot of limits on ourselves and what we think we can do, but I don't really think there are any limits.
Hi, and welcome to the Alli Taught Me podcast, where we learn something new each week to better position ourselves for success. I'm your host, Erica Kohlberg, and I'm a lawyer and money expert. My guest today is Alli Webb, who went from being a stay-at-home mom to founding a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The company is called Drybar, and you may be familiar with it. I know I personally love their dry shampoo. It's the best. So without further ado, I'm Erica Kohlberg. This is Alli Taught Me, and today we're here with Alli Webb. Alli, you founded Drybar and have done all of these amazing things with your career. What's one thing that you wish you would have learned earlier in your entrepreneurial journey?
You know, I definitely don't look back and think like, oh man, I wish I had done this differently. I think, you know, I kind of, as somebody who didn't go to college and doesn't have like a fancy business degree, I learned so much about business, you know, on the go in building this business. If I had like more of a formal education, maybe that would have been different, but I don't really believe that. You know, I think that I really learned everything I needed to learn as I went. And I enlisted people, my brother, who's my business partner in Drybar, we both did. We enlisted people to like help us along the way and figure out the things that we didn't know the answers to, you know? So I don't look back and think a lot that I wish I had known. And I get asked that question a lot. And I think it's a good question, but I definitely don't feel this sense of like, I wish I had known. I'm really grateful, you know, for all of like the steps that took me to where I am. I think there's some like technical stuff with like, you know, figuring out how much equity to give away to somebody. And in retrospect, we probably gave away too much equity in the beginning, but that's because nobody knew it was going to work. And it's like, it's such a blind decision that, you know, you're making. So I could say that, you know, I probably would have held more equity closer, but there was a lot of conversations in those early days with, especially with my brother, where he's like, do you want to own a big piece of a small pie or a small piece of a big pie? We are going to have to like give equity away if we're going to grow this thing. So
when you were starting Drybar in those beginning stages and mapping things out with your brother, what did you envision it would become?
Not what it did. I mean, you know, it was such a small idea in the beginning. And really, it was a vehicle to get me to like have a livelihood and something that I could do. And, you know, I had been a hairstylist forever, and then I was a stay-at-home mom, and I really loved that. And then I, you know, just started to get like antsy to do something for myself. And when we were mapping this out, my brother was running a real estate marketing company. My, you know, ex-husband at the time was the creative director at an advertising agency. I just wanted something for myself, and I wanted to do something, and I just had this like itch to go find something. And I started a mobile blowout business, which would, you know, turn into Drybar. But it was like, you know, we'll open this one little shop. It'll be a nice, like, take a little bit of money. Hopefully it does well. And then, you know, that'll be my livelihood. And my brother was willing to put in the money because he wanted to help his little sister. It was, you know, he put in $250,000, explained sweat equity to me, which I didn't know, never heard that word before. And I was like, that's amazing. Like, I don't have to put in any money and I get 50% of the business. But, you know, it was money that he didn't really like expect to get back. You know, we just thought this would be my one little store, and he was helping me like turn my mobile business into a brick and mortar. And that was it, you know, and I'd pick up my kids from preschool and that would be my life. And I was cool with that. Like, I loved that idea. I always loved the environment in hair salons. Like, stylists are so fun, and I loved being around other women. And I was just like really content to have one store. And that's really what we thought. I mean, I think we kind of knew in the back of our minds that like maybe this takes off and we can open more, I guess. But I mean, it really was such a small idea in the beginning. There was no plans of like world domination.
When was it clear to you that, wow, this is an idea that really has gravity to it?
I mean, very, very early on, right before we opened. Do you remember Daily Candy? I probably talked about it you might have heard about it when I was on How I Built This. I talked about it, but Daily Candy was this. It's funny you haven't heard of it. I think because you're probably too young.
I wonder if I missed it.
So Daily Candy used to be, it was like, I mean, we opened Drybar 12 years ago. So I feel like, it was probably starting to fade out a couple of years after that. But it was this, and this was like way before. It's like we had Blackberries and like we were all still getting used to the internet. And it was this like email that would go out and it would tell you the new hot, restaurant or club or store or whatever. And if you made it on Daily Candy, it was like the Oprah effect. It would just like your business would explode because you'd get so much exposure because women everywhere would get this list. And Daily Candy ran a piece on Drybar before we opened the first one in Brentwood. My brother and I were like at a restaurant eating lunch right down the street from the shop because we would go and check on all the progress. And our Blackberries started going crazy. And appointments were, all these appointments were trickling in.
Yeah.
And well, not trickling, like flooding. And we were like, there must be a glitch. Like what happened? And Daily Candy had run this thing. And he said like something very pithy, like hot air blowing into LA. And, women just started booking. And it just, it was crazy. So that was like a week before we opened. On the day that we opened, it was like a full house. I didn't have enough stylists. We had 8 chairs in that first Brentwood store. And I think I only had 6 stylists scheduled. Like I just didn't understand the business at that point or how I was going to run it. And I kind of think I didn't hire a manager. I think I thought I was just going to manage the store, which seemed doable and reasonable. But I ended up being in the first chair doing blowout after blowout after blowout. And I was always at the first one so I could manage too, like the front desk and make sure people were being treated well and all of that. And it was just like, we are onto something. And very quickly, like went into this mode of like, we have to hire more stylists. Like, I think I need a manager. And I think it was like that first day because it was so busy. And, it's just like the atmosphere in Drybar. It's loud and fun and music and the movie and the whole thing. And I remember like calling my brother and Cam, my ex-husband, and we were all crying because we were like, oh my God, we just knew. We knew like this had hit a chord with women and we were onto something. And it would prove to be a lot of work and a lot of build, and not every store opened up quite like that. But we knew like very early on that we had kind of captured lightning in a bottle.
Wow. And of that $250,000 initial investment, how much did it take to build that first Brentwood store?
Well, more than 250.
Really?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, it was crazy because we had no idea. And what we wanted, it's funny because my parents who are entrepreneurs, they had these little old lady clothing stores like the Schmatas and the thing, and like retirement communities in South Florida. And they spent like nothing on their build out. It was like slats on the wall, hanging rags, like very, very cheap. Michael and I had this vision. I wanted the shops to be like very pristine and clean, and like your boudoir, it's like, shabby chic meets like very modern, which was like, thank God we had such a great architect because I gave so many directions. But we wanted this like very high end feel, but at an affordable price. I mean, that was kind of the vision that we conjured up. And between all the millwork that we ended up, building out for the shelves, and also part of the vision was to have it look like a bar, but like a play on words. And then behind the bar was like, just like at a bar, instead of drinks and alcohol bottles, there'd be hair products.
Yeah.
And so that all was like, now I know way more about construction than I ever wanted to, but it's very expensive to have all that stuff custom built. So the build out was really expensive. HVAC, which also something I don't care about, but had to. Imagine we're pumping heat into a space.
Yeah.
So trying to keep it air conditioned and cool, it's like you're kind of going against the grain. And anyways, so there's so many different things, but it ended up costing more than we had. And my brother didn't really want to put in more. And we took on some early investors before we even opened that first store, because I was blogging about the store and what we were doing. We knew we needed to raise more money, and we had a few angels and people who had seen what we were doing and helped us like kind of get over the finish line. I think, don't quote me on this, but I feel like it got closer to like 400,000. And I remember the first handful of stores were in that range. Towards the end, they were more like $1 million to build out for a bunch of different reasons and many years later. But yeah, they're not cheap. My parents like almost fell over when they heard we were spending. They're like, "You're spending how much on this? And you're only charging $35 for a blowout. Like, how in the world do you make that work?" And for us, it was volume. If we could do enough blowouts in a day, this would work. Which, if you do the math on that, I was imagining. I mean, as not like a math person like you, I was like, if we do, if we can do like 8 blowouts an hour and we're open, 10 hours a day, like maybe this math works. And I think like we were hoping to do like between 40 and 50 blowouts a day was like where we thought we could like have a good business. And then we were more doing like between 70 and 90 a day. So it was just crazy. And, we we opened at 9 a.m. and we would close at like 7. And then we were like, you have to open earlier than 9. And so we started opening at 8. And then we started opening at 7 because people wanted to come in before
work.
Yeah. So there was so much learning, as we grew it, but it was expensive.
I would have never guessed. I often do go into stores. Like I'll go into a pizza store and calculate, okay, how many customers do they need to have? How much do I think they're making per year?
Yeah. It's
how
fascinating.
Much does pizza ingredients cost?
Yeah. And then, when product entered, that changed everything too, because a lot of people would buy then product and that helped,
So when did product enter?
Probably not until, I want to say like 3.5 years into it. I wanted to do product sooner, but we didn't have the bandwidth and we didn't have the money to do it. It wasn't until Castanea, our first private equity partner, came in and we had earmarked some of that money to build product, which I felt very strongly about that we needed. And more from like almost an aesthetic perspective, because we were using, a couple different product lines and it was kind of messy. And I always felt very strongly about having every stylist use the same blow dryer, the same brushes, so that there was that consistency in the experience, that you could sit in any stylist chair and you'd have pretty much the same experience. And of course, every stylist had their own kind of unique flair to what they did, but that it was the consistency was there. And then the products were a complete departure from that. And I really wanted to do our own product line. And also products that we were using from other lines were often too heavy. They didn't work well together. And, and I always felt like I needed to create stuff that would not be too heavy on the hair so that women would get a blowout and they can make it last for 5 days, because that was really what women wanted, versus a lot of the products that were too heavy. So I was very keen on getting a product line off the ground. It was just, that would, prove to be a huge process that I, learned as I went.
Were you involved in deciding these are the types of products we want?
It was totally my baby. I basically took the product. It was fun to develop line. I mean, we hired this really cool French consultant that had worked for L'Oreal for years, and she really understood, which I didn't, is like, how products react in different bottles, and then the packaging, they're like the box they get shipped in, like ridiculous stuff. And there's so much like scientifically that goes into making a product. I had such a vast experience with so many different product lines because I'd been in this business for so long. So I would take a product from this line, a product from this line, and this line, and be like, I like this product because it does this, but I don't like it because it does this, this, and this. And then I like this because it does this. And so I would, bring all of these to a lab, which is really how, at least I believe, products get made. It's like, I wanted to do all of these things, and there's not one product that does all these things. And so you work very closely with the lab, which I did. And then you get a product to the point where you like it, and then you start introducing fragrance. And then oftentimes a fragrance you like by itself, you put it with whatever the goop is, and then the smell is like, doesn't work. They don't work together. And so it's so much back and forth and so much trial and error, but I loved that, that became another big thing that I was doing. But I also had this like amazing lab of stylists. Like we had all these stylists who would, test products alongside me. So, if I liked something enough, then I'd send it into the stores without me there so that they would tell me the truth and say like, tell me what you think, and try it on clients when you think it's, makes sense. And so we'd get great feedback, and they were doing hair more than I was. So they would provide really amazing feedback. And so that really helped inform the line. And then Cam, my ex-husband, he was responsible for like the bottles and what went on the outside. Of course, I, collaborated with him on that, but that was like really his lane.
How easy was it, because you already had this established brand, to get into the major stores like Sephora and Ulta?
Well, there was certainly the credibility that we had from Drybar that like opened a lot of doors. And one of the partners in Castanet, our private equity group, was a woman named Janet Gerwich, and she founded Laura Mercier Cosmetics, and she had a lot of experience building brands, and she was friends with the CEO of Sephora, and got us in the door for a meeting with Sephora. But there was so much brand love out there for what we were doing, and Sephora was an early partner of ours, and we really went to them with a pretty big repertoire of products and designs, and they gave us a lot of really great direction because they knew this world so much better than we did. You can't really say that, or people don't seem to resonate with this or that, and so they really, I mean, we had these in the kitchen meetings, we would call them, where we would kind of they'd kind of say, give us all this feedback on what they think would work and what wouldn't. And I pushed back on certain things that I felt really strongly about, but we certainly took so much of their advice to heart and developed this line and tested it in 75 Sephora doors and to see if it would work. And it did. And it took off, and it was so exciting. And then all of a sudden we were in 2 businesses, running the stores and running the product line. So it was really exciting. And Sephora, as you probably know it today, I mean, Sephora is highly saturated, but at that time, hair was a much smaller category for them. I believe when we went, it was Bumble and Bumble, Living Proof,
Moroccan oil, maybe.
And they didn't even have Moroccan oil yet. It was a very small assortment. And then we came in and kind of blew the doors off of hair and blew them away. No pun intended. With how well the product was doing it. And I really think the reason for that was because of the credibility we had established with the handful of stores that we had at the time. I think it was maybe 25 locations at that point. Sephora headquarters are in San Francisco, and we had penetrated California and New York, and we had so much press and so much notoriety that they were really happy to partner with us. And what we found was that women who didn't have access to a Drybar location wanted to buy our blow dryer because they felt like they were buying a piece of the brand. This was all these products we were selling were actually what we were using in the stores. So you could buy it and, get your own little Drybar experience at home was kind of how we thought about it. And so it really worked. And then I went on QVC, and we sold on QVC for a while, and had a really great business there. Is the same thing. It's you don't have access to a Drybar location, but here are the products to get a great blowout at home.
What do you think you did right to grow this community and almost a cult following? Because a lot of brands are out there. They're faceless brands. People like the products, but I don't feel like there's this cult following and connection that Drybar has.
It was really just our instinct. I felt, we all felt collectively like this was my idea and this was my baby, although I did not execute it alone. And I feel really strongly about always saying that I did not do this by myself. I had a lot of help, and I knew hair, and I knew a lot about this business, but I also needed a lot of help. But with that said, we also knew that this was my idea, this was my baby. I'm an actual hairstylist. I've been doing hair forever, and I'm a mom, and it was a great story to tell, and I found that women were so supportive. And I, obviously I met so many women, and I built such a strong community in LA because I was always at the store and I was always talking, to women. And, part of me talking to women was always making sure they were happy, getting feedback. I was very connected to the women that were coming in the stores. And then I would go to all the openings. I went to the first 50 openings, which was a lot of traveling, and it was kind of a crazy time. But I think that I personally formed a connection with so many women in that time, to the point where I would tell people my story, and then after talking to them for 10 minutes, they'd can I give you a hug? I'm so proud of you. So much like that. And I think that, part of it was that a little bit of this underdog, came out of nowhere, don't have a pedigree, and just kind of built this thing from scratch and had a lot of heart. And that was a piece of it, and all the emails came from me. And we were building this very connected story where women felt not only do they love this service and going to Drybar, they loved
you and your story,
believing in a woman and supporting a woman. And those relationships are relationships that I still have today. And I've, met so many people, and Drybar's opened so many doors for me. And people like having access to a founder, which of course would prove to be true with Drybar was probably one of the first, but there are so many brands that have since started that you feel like you kind of know the person who started it and you have more access. And I personally DM a lot of people who reach out to me on Instagram, and so many other founders now do. But when you think about at least when I was growing up, it was like, companies and brands, like you had no idea who was running them or what was happening. They were just this like faceless brand. And so it happened very organically, putting me out front. And, I remember those early conversations of like, that I was like the face of the brand. And it was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Like we should, right. It really resonated with women. So
Yeah. Well, it is interesting. Even when I think about going to the Sephora store the last 5 to 10 years, or let's say the last 5 years, how much it's changed because it was a lot of these faceless brands. But now when I go in, I feel like more than 50% there's a face attached. There's
Yeah.
Rihanna or there's
yeah.
Huda or all
Yeah.
these
It's amazing.
entrepreneurs.
Yeah. I think that there's been this really beautiful shift in that there's, so many female founded brands that are, emerging and you feel like you can relate to them and they're approachable.
Yeah. What do you think of I know some people in the space say that all of these influencers are going after the cash grab now, trying to get beauty products.
Like starting their own lines.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I have mixed feelings on it. For example, Jennifer Aniston was attached to Living Proof for a while in some way, but now she started her own product line. And I feel like, for me as a consumer, I'm very interested in her own product line. Her putting her name on a product line felt, less interesting to me. It's funny. I have one of my favorite lipsticks is by Rare Beauty, which I didn't even know was Selena Gomez's company. And then I was like, oh, this is Selena Gomez, but like, good for her. Like she started a really great, brand. And there's so many like that I think are great. And I get it, it's like we're living in a very like entrepreneurial world. And if you have a platform and you can start something really great, for sure, go do it. I think as somebody who doesn't have that kind of fame and notoriety, it's kind of like, it looks, at least on the outside, like it's so easy because you are this big famous person. So of course, when, Rihanna does anything, everyone's going to tune in. So, but I think like good for them for taking advantage of that opportunity.
Yeah.
I mean, I would too.
What is your life like? Do you get recognized every day on the streets?
No. I mean, sometimes, but not like I can like walk down the street with no problem. But, I mean, I definitely get people stopping me often in random places and random times, like after Shark Tank airs. I usually will get like some people and, and certainly people have, come up to me probably than normal people. Well, not normal, but like, I think
without some kind of presence online.
Yeah. Yeah. But no, not like anything crazy. Yeah. It's always nice when people do. And it's usually like a very like, you inspired me, or I'm such a big fan of Drybar and you made me want to go do my own thing. It's kind of, like that, which is really flattering.
Yeah. I think what you were saying earlier is so true, though. People want to root for the underdog. I think because people want to see the potential that they could one day reach there
themselves.
And the closer they feel to you in the same journey, the more they feel like they could achieve that.
Yeah. And, in this kind of like second half of my life, I speak at a lot of things and I really enjoy it because, I like to really be as like raw and open as I can be. And there is an attainableness about me and my story that, to your point, I think people, it's like kind of like if I did it, you can do it. And like to be able to inspire people that like you don't have to have, followed one certain plan or way or whatever, and you can go do it your own way is something I'm really proud of.
You mentioned your parents were entrepreneurs. So what businesses were they in?
So they had like these little old lady clothing stores in South Florida. It was like the schmata business where, the muumuus that your grandmother wears.
Yeah.
And they were catering to like a retired woman. And he was really pretty genius because my father realized, who had been in this business and his family was in the business, that the only place for like, it was called Missy Sportswear, like, whatever the grandma age is, like 70s and whatever. The only place they could shop was at the mall. And like, they'd have to like get to the mall and the mall was big and overwhelming. But there was always these shopping centers that they would take like the trolley over and they would have, the nail salon and the hair salon and the Chinese store and the grocery store and dry cleaning and the pharmacy. And they would do all their things in this one shopping center, but there was no shopping for them. And my dad realized, it's like the apples don't fall far from the tree. I mean, there was like, why isn't there a place for women to go to like shop for clothes? Why do they have to go to the mall, which was further in a pain. And so they opened these stores. It was called Flips, which was my dad's nickname. My dad's name is Phil. And my mom, who was like working, doing something else, like joined my dad to open these stores. And I mean, they killed it. They were like, I think the most they opened was like 7 in this Boca Del Rey, Boynton Beach area of South Florida. They were great. And it was, my brother and I worked in those stores. My brother and I were like really grew up in those stores and learned so much that I didn't know I was learning until like years later when I would apply these things and they were in the back of my mind. And my dad was so brilliant. Like he would set up, and these were not like fancy stores by any means, but he would set up like chairs in the front of the store, and then the women would go in and shop, and my dad would bring them bagels and coffee and the newspaper, and like they were like, my dad was like the mayor of these shopping centers. It was very cute, and the women loved my dad, and the men loved him too because he would like make it really comfortable, and he obviously knew that if the men were comfortable and they would chill for a while, they'd let their wives shop longer and we'd make more money.
Yeah.
So it was all very brilliant. And I watched like my mom, who would run the stores, how she bent over backwards for these women. And they were also like, I mean, sometimes older women can be a little cranky. And, I remember watching a lot of these women like be not very like kind to my mom. And as a kid, you just like, you're learning about the world. And I was like, why these women are so mean to my mom? And yet my mom is so nice to them. I'm like, what? And as a kid, it's like, you just like, it doesn't make sense. And I would talk to my mom about it, and she would say like, this is our business and they're supporting us and they're paying our bills. So, it's our job. It's a service job, and it's our job to make them feel really good and to take care of them and kill them with kindness and like not take it personally. And I remember watching my mom in awe and being like, how does she do that? It's like she really knew how to, make women feel special, and she just didn't like take things personally. So it was a great lesson, all of that, watching my parents operate this business. And I think so much of it informed, who me and my brother would ultimately become.
What was the relationship like with your brother when you started working together? Because at that time he was employed full-time at Yahoo, I believe.
Yeah, he was at Yahoo. And then right when we opened Drybar, he had his own real estate marketing company. But before that, we worked together for Nicole Miller, who's a designer. And 20 years ago, she was a really big designer in New York City. And my brother was working at her corporate office at the showroom, and I was working at the Soho store. This is when we both lived in New York together. And as like little budding entrepreneurs, we decided to move back to South Florida, which is we knew that area, and open up Nicole Miller boutiques. And we opened one in Meisner Park in Boca Raton, and then in Miami in South Beach. And so basically I was like running these stores and doing the drive, which was horrendous. And I was like, what am I doing? So basically I'm like 21 years old, like running retail stores, which, is a great job and opportunity, but like, it wasn't my passion. And I think we both thought because our parents and like, it seemed to make sense. I wanted to be in fashion, but we were fighting like crazy, like cats and dogs. I mean, I know it was because it wasn't like what we both loved, it was like, it just wasn't our thing. And I remember like realizing I needed to go to my brother and say, I don't think I can do this anymore, because it was really ruining our relationship. And we had always been close our whole lives. And my parents were watching this unfold, and they were like, you guys, like, what? We were just fighting all the time. It was awful. And I think that whole experience, like, pushed me to like, now what? I'm like 21. I don't know what I want to do with my life. The only thing I really love is hair. So I went to my brother, so scared that he was going to like be so mad at me. But I was like, Mike, I don't think I want to do this. I'm not happy. And I think I really want to go to beauty school. He was like, I get it. And I think that's a great idea. You love hair, you love people. Like I think you'd be really good at it. And I had this like vision of moving to New York and doing editorial and fashion shows. And he really saw that. And my parents were like less enthused about the whole idea, but Michael was the first person I told about it, really believed in it. And I felt like kind of left me off the hook, and we sold those stores and I went to beauty school.
And then how many years later was it that Drybar started?
So, so then we went our separate ways. I think that's probably around the time he went to work at Yahoo. And I went to beauty school, and I, would then go and work in many salons in Florida, where I went to beauty school. And then I moved back to New York City and worked for John Sahag, who was a really famous hairstylist in his time. So, I mean, it was a lot of years later. I mean, I think the Nicole Miller stuff was when I was in my early 20s. And then I got married, had kids, moved to LA. At that time, Michael had moved to LA too. And I think I was 35 when we started Drybar. So like, almost 15 years later, there was a lot of trauma from the Cole Miller days. We were like screaming at each other in the break room. And when we decided to go back into business together, my parents were like, really?
Are you sure?
Yeah. But what was so different and unique about it the second time around was that, first of all, we were older and more mature, which is huge. But also I had, now gained 15 years of experience doing hair, and whatever had happened with us in the past, there was a new level of respect that my brother certainly had, knowing that I knew this industry way better than he did. But, he was like a business guy, and his instincts were so good when it came to business that together it could be a really great partnership. And we had some tough, like, early conversations about like what it can't be. And I told my brother like he couldn't talk to me that way and he couldn't act this way and blah, blah, blah. And he told me the things that I can't even remember, but he told me things that, that were bothersome to him. And we were really aligned, and throughout the whole Drybar experience, we never fought really. I can think of like maybe 2 fights that we had the entire time.
Do you remember what they were over?
I knew you were going to ask that. Well, I remember it really well because we had our investors at the office, and Michael and I were fighting, and it was so stupid. I can't even believe we fought about it. So we were opening in Vegas, and he's probably going to kill me for telling this story. We were opening in Vegas, and it was a completely different thing because we were going to have an actual bar. Most of Drybar's like, you get a glass of champagne or whatever, but it's like you don't have a full bar. But we were gonna at the Cosmo and the Vegas shops. It was obviously we were going to do that. So we, at that point we had so many people working for us. We had the president of retail who had come to me and said, in terms of like we were creating drinks like go with like the whole theme and whatever. And the woman who was in charge at that time came to me and said, hey, what do you think about red wine? I was like, no, we definitely shouldn't have red wine. And I was like, that was it. And this was like weeks, ago. And then my brother like got wind of that and was like, no, of course we should have red wine. It's a full bar. And I was like, and so this bubbled up, and I was like, no, Mike, like, who cares that it's a full bar? We can do whatever the fuck we want. We don't have to, where is it written that you have to have red wine in a bar? And it's Drybar. It's not a bar, and I guess it was like one of the only times I can remember us like, we must have been having, something else must have been going on, because he was like, no, we're going to have red wine. And I was like, no, we're not. And we had never really had a time where it was like, who has more seniority, even though he was the CEO and I technically wasn't, I didn't want to be. We were always like very, very equal. Our equity was always equal. Everything was equal. And it was like, it turned into this power struggle. And my brother's like, was basically like trying to pull like some sort of rank. And I was like, you can't do that, and we started like screaming, and our investors were in like the conference room, and our CEO at the time, John, came in and he's like, what's wrong with you guys? Of all of the days that you could have a big fight like this, because we were screaming at each other. So here's the good ending to that story. We did end up putting red wine. I did lose that battle, and we ended up removing it because it didn't even sell that well.
I know a lot of typical entrepreneurial advice is don't go into business with your family. You obviously went into business with your brother as well as your husband at the time.
Yeah.
If you were to do it again, would you still do the same thing?
Yeah. Even though my ex-husband and I ended up getting divorced, and Drybar like became our baby. We had kids very early on in our marriage, and then we had Drybar. It's pretty rare to have, these 3 people that we had between me, my brother, and Cam, which Cam was like, a creative genius. My brother really understood business so well, and I knew hair. It was just so magical, and talk about the stars aligning for all of us to be able to like figure this out without paying ourselves and just doing it for like, hopefully it'll pay off one day, So no, I don't think I would have done it any differently. I think that is a kind of a separate conversation in terms of like how we neglected our marriage, and, we put everything into the kids and Drybar and like,
I need to dig into this though, because I was telling you before we started recording, my husband and I, we launched our first company last year, at the end of last year. And before that, he was working full time. I was doing my own thing full time. And so we would only really see each other from 7 p.m. onwards once he got home from work.
Right.
And we had so much to talk about that was
So
not
nice.
about the same business
Yeah.
because we each had our different days.
Right.
And now I feel like it's really hard to separate between our marriage life and our work life together.
Yeah, it is. You're right. Well, and I think there's are you familiar with Esther Perel?
I'm not.
You definitely go check out her stuff, read some
Okay.
of her books. A lot of what she talks about is that it's so important, to your point, which sounds like you understand intuitively, to have separate things to talk about and to go away from. And I think it's her who talks a lot about how when you are working together, you're together a lot, how you have to create space within the marriage and go do other things, whatever they are, so that you can come back to each other and have things to talk about. That it's like crucial for the success of a marriage,
Yeah.
And I think for me and Cam, even though like we got divorced and we're not certainly not like the example here necessarily, but I think it's probably more relevant to talk about it with my current husband. I just got remarried, and we actually do a lot of things together, but we don't work probably together as closely as you guys do. But I always find that like even if we're working on a project together, if we take space from each other and just like you just make it, you work on a different project, he works on a different project, and you can create space to come back together. It makes a big difference. And I think just like having the awareness and thinking about that versus like always being together, I think a healthy relationship needs to like breathe and needs to have some sort of space. So figuring out a way to create that, I think is really healthy and important.
It's so tough because I think we both love the business. We both
Yeah.
love what we do. And that's what consumes our minds and therefore
Yeah.
our conversations.
But even if you split out what you're working on and what he's working on and
Mhm.
like can like have some actual space, like if you have a separate office and he has a separate office, so then you can come back together.
I'll send him to a WeWork.
Yeah. Just get him out of the house. He's right here looking at me.
When you look back at the years you spent at Drybar building it, what was your favorite time?
Definitely the early years, probably from like year 1 to year like 4 was my very favorite time because, we were still like treadmill of trying to figure out all the things and how to make it work. And I love the growth phase of a company. And so, building the company, and I have particularly fond memories of working. We had in our WeHo store, which is our third location, we had this beautiful location that had like tall ceilings, and we had built like an office kind of like perched above the shop that had a big window so I could see down. And that was like where I worked out of. And I loved it. I mean, it was so fun. And I loved being in the store every day. We had such fun. I mean, that's part of what I always loved about this industry was the stylists, are so fun. And I really knew all the stylists at that point because we were still small enough where I would hop around between Brentwood and Studio City and WeHo. And so I was like definitely the most connected to the business then. And it was my baby that I was like growing and nurturing. And it was just so fun. I mean, I worked like a dog. I worked so much, but I loved the work. And, it was just fun. And we laughed a lot. And so many cool opportunities were opening up. And the business was growing. And, my life was like crazy. And I was doing all this cool stuff. And yeah, it was really fun. And I think it just like, it slowly started to change when we brought in, which was needed. We brought in a professional CEO. The infrastructure of the company grew so much, which it needed to sustain this like what was becoming this massive brand. But, it definitely changed where I like went from working in an office in the store to working at an office in like an office building, which was like cool too, but like not exactly the same. And I think I missed that. And so, yeah, I think it was those early years.
When did you get the taste of success with money? I mean, was money hitting your bank account or was just through equity?
I mean, not for a long time. I mean, we didn't pay ourselves much for forever. I mean, I think my salary was like, I don't know, it was low. I didn't even like think about it or care about it. It wasn't until private equity came and infused the business with, I said 25 million, but I think it might have been 27 million. that we started to take like real salaries, which by the way, all these other people that we had hired were taking higher salaries. And I was like, why are they getting paid so much money? Why, but I owned so much of the business, and I understood that like this was the long game of like, we'll eventually sell this and my equity will be worth a lot. But yeah, so I would say it was like, Castanea came in around year 2 or 3, and in my salary started to grow over time. And I remember being like, couldn't believe that like what I was getting paid. But the business was really thriving, and my brother was like very generous and always like a very good big brother. And I remember the irony of this is interesting. We were in IKEA and we were like shopping because, IKEA's IKEA. And I came out of the store and my brother was like standing outside with a brand new Mercedes that he had like bought me for as like, it was like I'd never had, a car like that. And my husband at the time, knew about it. And I was just like, are you kidding? And it was like probably one of the first big like things that I had that was like, a kind of a marker of our success. So yeah, I remember that moment quite well.
What was the first big thing you bought for yourself?
I think it actually was my brother too, who bought me my first like designer bag. It was a Celine bag. I don't remember one big thing other than like I did start like buying nicer bags and nicer shoes, but then I would still go shop at like Forever 21 and Zara. I'm a big high-low, But with the first like big purchase we made was we bought a house, and that was like a big deal. And we bought this beautiful house with a big yard, and we put in a pool, and we burned through a lot of money doing that, but it was like it was a big deal. I mean, we up until then, like we couldn't buy a house, we just living in LA, it was like impossible. And so this wasn't LA, we had moved to Orange County, which is a whole other story, but my brother was living there. So we ended up opening shop there, and we bought a house in Orange County. And it was so cool because we had always like been in apartments until then.
Yeah. How did you think about time management in those early years? Where was your time being allocated?
Well, not well. I was burning the candle at both ends, and part of it was like a love for what I was doing. We used to talk about this a lot, me and my brother, like what was my highest and best use, and it was like very forward facing in terms of like press, and I was doing tons of like press and interviews. I was doing QVC, so I was flying to like Philadelphia and New York a lot. I was developing the product. I was always in and out of the stores and making sure that like customer service was right. I was like organizing training for all the stylists.
Mm-hmm.
I was doing a lot back then. I hadn't had my hands in like those buckets. Whereas like, things I wasn't doing was like writing manuals for operations or anything in finance or, any of that stuff was like not my thing. So, it was like really stuff that was like customer focused, stylist focused, public focused. Those were kind of the big buckets of what I did. And I loved it.
So in 2020, you ended up selling the products business of Drybar for $255 million. What was that day that the paperwork was signed? What did that feel like to you?
It felt so surreal. And I remember we were in our conference room of our office, and somebody brought champagne. I remember we couldn't open the champagne, of course, but it was just one of those moments that was like, I'm a big believer in like everything happens for a reason and like manifesting. Like I believe in all that kind of woo-woo stuff. And I had always said, and my brother still brings this up, like I had always said, I thought we were going to like early in the first like year, like I bet we're going to sell this business for 250 million. That was my number. We sold for 255 million, but I always thought that was just the number that was in my head. So it was also kind of eerie that that's what we sold it for. It was amazing, but also like, wow, we've sold the business, or we've sold the product business. I built it. I promoted it, it was my baby. And there was a little bit of like I don't really get to do this anymore feeling, and that was right around the time. I think I got separated I think it was 2019. So that was February, and it was September that I separated from my ex-husband. And that was a really rough period from September to February. And so there was a lot, happening for me. And I had, because of the divorce and just because of like how things were set up structurally, and we had an office in Studio City, and then there was an office in Orange County, and Cam and I shared an office in Studio City. So I stopped going to that office because it was like too uncomfortable. And so, things were in a bit of a spiral for me anyways. So it was just like it was a weird time to like kind of cut that too. And would be the beginning of like a little bit of an identity crisis for me, because it's like, oh, like I don't do this anymore. And I think everyone has different stories about what it's like when you sell a product company. And I have friends who've sold product companies and like still work with the brand and whatever. It wasn't the case with us. They didn't really see much value, I guess, in keeping me on, which was a pretty like rough blow to get to. Is like I built this brand and I have nothing to do with it now. I don't have anything to do with any of the product anymore, which was
Did you know that when you were selling that they weren't going to keep you on?
Not really. It was a kind of a vague thing. And because of everything that was going on, I was a little detached, which, is on me because of the divorce and because I was like, I had kind of gone into a depression and I was really struggling emotionally. So I wasn't nearly as like involved as I had once been. But then for that to happen and then to just be like not involved at all was like, kind of a tough blow.
Yeah.
However, we just made $255 million. So it was also like, well, it is what it is. So my experience of selling it was a little bittersweet. Also like just kind of the natural progression of things, really.
How do you deal as an ultra successful entrepreneur? Like, how have you dealt with mental health and trying to figure out how to balance? I don't know how to ask this because I've never asked someone, but I struggle with it myself.
Yeah.
I struggle with anxiety and depression. And
Yeah.
how do you deal with that?
I mean, it's interesting because I never dealt with any of that before, and I really didn't understand it until like it like hit me in the face. And with my divorce, I really like the divorce was the right thing to do, and I felt like very good about that decision. But what I then found was like there was a pretty massive hole in my life of where this person that I had spent 17 years with, now it was just this kind of nothingness, and raising kids together and having now to do that on my own, and just the overwhelm, I think, hit me really hard. I can't talk about it in terms of like it was so new to me, and I was just like, what do you do? I mean, I turned to like very much an open book to like anybody I saw. I was like, can you help me? Like I was seeking out help in any way I could, and I started to learn how to do transcendental meditation then. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's pretty powerful. It's a meditation where you have to go kind of get trained through it, and which is pretty minimal, but it's 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes at night, and you get a mantra, and it really helped take me out of that like fight or flight mode. And I had a handful of people tell me like how much it helped like calm their nervous system, because I was just so very anxiety ridden. Like I could feel it in my body, and I was just like constantly, I lost so much weight. I couldn't eat. I was just like a mess. And transcendental meditation was probably like the first thing that I found that was really helpful and like calming me down, and since then I've learned to do things that are like good for my soul. Like I take a nap a lot in the middle of the day now, which of course like I never did that, but like that reset. And I usually, like, my husband and I joke that it's like a medi nap, because I'll meditate and I usually fall asleep, because that's the thing about transcendental is like you go very, very deep and you feel like you're sleeping, but you weren't really sleeping. It's really trippy. I mean, you should try it. It's amazing.
I'll try it.
And you can I think you can do like online training I went to the David Finch like place here in LA. That's amazing. And I learned to like take better care of myself. I mean, I do like a lot of things now. Like I have an infrared sauna, which was like, you were asking like a big purchase. Like that was a pretty big deal. I bought it probably like 5 years ago, and I've moved it from like 3 houses, and it's a big infrared sauna. It fits 2 people, and you go in and you sweat, and there's infrared light. And I really think, and then I'll do like a cold bath after, and like the hot cold therapy, I think, really helps. And then therapy, just traditional therapy is really important. And I see like a Reiki healer, like I do all the things, and I get massages a lot, I'll tell you about Squeeze in a second, but I think that I neglected myself. I mean, I feel like self-care is this word that gets thrown around all the time now, but I think I was very neglectful for like the things that I needed. And I thought like getting a manicure and getting a blowout was like, check that box, and And what I realized when I needed like some quiet time and I needed space and I'm not like busy the way I was back then, even though I'm still really busy. I have more control over what I'm doing and when I'm doing it now. But learning to take that time and space for myself and like just saying no to something or pushing something is really powerful and not something that I had done previously.
Now that it's been a few years since you sold the business and since the divorce, looking back at it, are you still upset by how
It all went down.
it all went down?
Not
I'm upset for you. This is my first time hearing this.
Well, I mean, I'm not upset. I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful. I mean, Drybar was such an incredible blessing and opened so many doors and so many opportunities. I mean, sitting here with you, people that have sought me out, opportunities that I've been able to get because of Drybar. I will always be the Drybar founder and nobody can take that from me. And that will always open doors and always like people want to hear about that experience. While I've had moments of like frustration and anger and like not exactly things going down the way I want to. And then, without getting into the whole story, the pandemic and how that really crushed our stores and salons. And that was like, ooh, so rough, not to mention like how like we had 4,000 stylists and like how we couldn't really preserve their jobs. And there was a lot that happened that is like, oh, that is not how I saw it going down. But again, and probably one of the things I learned during like the depression spiral was like gratitude, 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 just be grateful. And I have so much to be grateful for. And, I didn't really get into it, but part of the depression too was like my son, who's now 17, he was like going off the rails. He was like 12 or 13 when we got divorced, and he like spiraled and started doing drugs and ended up in rehab. And so it was like, oh my God, in the midst of the divorce, then this was happening. And so like, it was like, just became about like saving Grant and getting him, and which actually ultimately would cause me and my ex-husband to like come back together to be like, to deal and help our son.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a blessing in disguise in that way. But yeah, I mean, like shit got rough. And the fact that like we're where we are now and like I'm happier than I've ever been. And, I think that period in my life, my brother jokes that it's like, I'm Alli 2.0 now. Cause I was like very, just this like harder version of myself. And I softened out a lot with all of the things that happened in that, that like span of 2 years. And, on the other end of it, I'm just grateful.
And you met your new husband.
And I have an amazing new husband. I'm so head over heels in love and, so grateful for that. And, so there's definitely nothing to be resentful about.
What are you working on right now that you're most excited about?
It's like been a bit of a reinvention for me. And like, because my identity is so tied to Drybar, which of course I'm, like I said, so grateful for, but also like, well, now what do I do and who am I? Which has been a big question mark. And while we were still like in the throes of Drybar, my brother really wanted to start working on this massage idea. And we were like, we have no bandwidth. We can't do this. But this woman, Brittany Driscoll, who was running our marketing for many years at Drybar, who's amazing, she came to us and said, I think it's time for me to move on. I've been with you guys for so long and I think I want like my new challenge. And we're like, well, we've been noodling on this idea for this massage concept because, rightfully so, we just felt like it's so similar to Drybar. Massages are like this thing that you either overpay at a spa or you go to like the discount chain and the experience is bad. And those are the exact same, scenarios of why Drybar worked. And so we basically got like the crew back together, our same architect, Cam. And even though we were, separated at that point, Cam did all the creative, and then Brittany is the CEO. And Michael and I, when Michael first came to me with this, I was like, I don't have it in me to like build a business like we did Drybar because, it was a lot. And he was like, no, me either. But Brittany does, and it was a first time entrepreneur and she has just done such a beautiful job. And so in a nutshell, it is a brick and mortar. We call it like just a way better massage experience. And kind of the differentiator of Squeeze is that you book on the app, you tip on the app. So like Uber or Postmates, like everything is done on the app in like the privacy of your phone before you even walk in the door. You walk in, they have all your preferences from like all the like oil or lotion and the music type and the pressure and all these things. And the app is we spent like over a year working on the app. It's highly intuitive and amazing. And then you walk in, you get your massage, your therapist knows all your preferences. And there's a lot of like special little things. You should go before you leave town.
I'll go.
I'll give you my code. You should go in.
Discount code?
Yeah, it's a free one.
Wow.
I know.
You know I like that.
I know. Yeah, no, we got you. You guys both should go in, make a date out of it. It's in Studio City right now, but what's been really amazing is we opened right before the pandemic, and it was like unbelievably successful. Like if you look on Yelp, all 5-star reviews. I mean, Brittany has just done an amazing job. And our plan was to completely franchise it, which wasn't what we did with Drybar, but we learned so much, through Drybar that franchisees, like they have skin in the game, like they're in it. So, we decided to do it completely franchise. And it was really fun to watch Brittany like become a first-time entrepreneur. So we kind of like held on for dear life during the pandemic, and now we're up and running again, and we've sold 50 franchises in like the last 6 months around the country.
Wow.
So it's about, like, none of them are open yet. I don't know, by the time this opens, maybe at the time this airs, maybe some of them will be, but there's just been so much interest because the experience is seamless. It's really, and we've done a lot to like treat our therapists much better than any other place that they've worked. And I'm really proud of it. And I really think that and it's something that men and women could do, which, usually I only cater to women.
Can you dig in quickly to the economics of the franchise model? How does that work for the people who buy into it?
So basically, I don't know if I can say legally what it costs because there's like FTD
No
stuff
problem.
like that.
We can make up.
Yeah, but I can also get back to you if you want to fill it in. I can ask Brittany. But it costs a certain amount of money to build the shops, and that's on them. And then they pay us a certain royalty, to continue to run and operate them. So I don't know if that answers, but I mean, that's basically how it works, is like it costs them however much money it costs them to build it, which is somewhere around $700,000 or $800,000 to open a store. And then there's like a royalty fee that they pay to us, every month as well. So that's kind of, how it works.
It's a very good business model.
Yeah, it's great. And for, a budding entrepreneur, it is great because it's like, we've done so much of the heavy lifting. You get to just, come in and be a part of this and like be trained on it and not have to do so much of the upfront that we've done. So it's awesome. It's great for like somebody who wants to be an entrepreneur, and we're selling locations for whoever's listening.
And you're also working on Canopy too.
Yes. So Canopy happened because I was kind of like starting, I just like can't stay still. And I was thinking like, maybe I should build another product line, especially after all that went down with Drybar. And so I got connected to the CEO of Canopy and co-founder, and because he had another company that does some product development, and I thought I would talk to him about that. But it turned out he was like, it realized it wasn't a fit, but he's like, but we have this company also called Canopy. It's humidifiers. And I was like, why would I be interested in a humidifier? And then he explained to me that, it's actually this amazing beauty hack that they figured out because one of the other founders' girlfriend was using like one of those ugly blue humidifiers that gets very moldy unless you clean it religiously. And she was using it. They live in New York City because she had it next to her bed because it would help her skin, and her skin would be so much more hydrated and look much better. Makeup went on better, skincare went on better. It's better for her scalp and her hair. And I was like, what? Realizing that this is like the ultimate beauty hack. Why don't I know about this thing?
Yeah.
And I felt this kind of pull to like help them spread the word, and like that every woman should have a Canopy next to their bed when they sleep, especially as you're aging and wrinkles and all of those things. They become more pronounced if your skin is dry, And so it's an interesting business because our busy season, we're just rolling into it now, September, October, and then through like the winter months when it's so obvious you need a humidifier because it's dry out. But I feel very strongly like, if you have an air conditioner running that is sucking out tons of moisture of your skin, especially when you sleep, we lose so much moisture when we sleep. So, I think it was like a combination of like thinking like, wow, I really need this. And then I started using it and really noticed a difference to like, why aren't more women aware of this? And it, like, as you saw, it looks really cool. And it's just, it doesn't get moldy. It has a lot of like technology that most humidifiers don't have. So there's no like chimney of water that's coming out. You'll see when you turn it on, you barely even know it's there. And there's a lot of really cool components to it.
I'm so excited.
Yeah.
My sister introduced me initially. my sister basically like is really into skincare and everything.
Yeah.
And she introduces me to everything. So dry shampoo.
Yeah.
She introduced me to humidifiers. She introduced me to.
Yeah.
So she's on top of it.
She knows. Yeah.
I'm very low maintenance. Like,
but that's the thing about the canopy that's so great. It's like you don't have to do much, but you'll see a difference. Yeah, it's pretty exciting.
This was so much fun. I'm a huge fan of everything you've done, and now having been able to sit down with you for an hour and a half, I'm really grateful that you got to do this. And I'm so glad that even with all of the success, you're so humble and you're so relatable, and you're also open to talking about the ups and the downs, which I think is so rare. So I want to thank you. I have a final closing question that I ask.
Okay.
So the podcast is called Erica Taught Me, but really today is about Alli Taught Me. So what do you want people to walk away from this podcast being able to say, Alli taught me this?
That anybody can do anything. You know, I think we put a lot of limits on ourselves and what we think we can do and what's capable and what we're capable of and what's possible. But I don't really think there are any limits.
I love it. Thank you.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed today's episode, I'll leave the link for you to follow Alli on Instagram in the show notes. And I have a huge favor to ask. Whether it's your first time listening to the podcast or you've been tuning in for weeks with me, it would mean a lot to me if you could take a quick moment to leave a review of the podcast wherever you're listening to it. It just helps other people find the podcast, and even a sentence is perfect. Thank you so much for choosing to spend your time with me today, and I'm so excited to talk to you next Tuesday on a brand new episode of Erica Taught Me. See you there.